Welcome to the formulize tutorial video about screens. We've been working up till now with the wildlife activity form screen, and just when you first go to that form and see a list of entries, it looks like this. And so, well, lots of options, more than the average user probably needs. You can tailor the way the screen appears so that it meets your user's expectations more appropriately, and you can in fact create a whole series of screens, each for different purposes, and start to direct your users to one or the other, depending on how you intend them to interact with your forms. So I'm logged in as the administrator now, and that's the screen there as it shows up by default. Here we are on the administration side. I have two tabs open so we can look at both relatively quickly. If we open up the wildlife monitoring application, we've got the two forms in it, and you can always get to the screens. You can either configure the form and click on the screens tab, or you can go directly to either the default screens, the entries in the form, or the regular form itself by clicking these links here. So let's just go straight to the entries in the wildlife activity form. Well, and just to show you the difference, if you instead came to this page, the one that has, for example, the list of elements, if you've been following through all the videos, you'll have seen that a lot. On the Screens tab, there's the list of screens that are available, and there's the entries in the Wildlife Activity Form screen. We can click that, and we're sort of back to where we were. So you can jump directly here from from the front page, or from the front of the administration section if you want, or you can just get to it anytime through the Screens tab. Now there's many options here for screens. There's the basic settings for list of entries screen. There is then different controls for what entries you want to display, for how the headings in the interface should behave, and the text on all the buttons as well. We'll look at all of these things, but actually the way we're going to do this is let's create a new screen so we can have an extra one, and we can start to look at the difference that multiple screens can give you. So we'll make a new screen, and we'll call this the recent sightings. We'll call the screen recent sightings. Now there's three different kinds that are available right now in formulize. There's lists of entries. We've been working with those. The regular form itself, you fill in the form, and there's various options for how that form might behave. And then there's also a multi-page form. You could take a long form and you could divide it up into multiple pages, a few elements on this page, a few more on the next page, a few more on the page after that, and you can control skipping from page to page as well, depending on the answers that users have put into previous values. But we're just going to stick with the list of entries for now. Other screen types will be covered in other videos. There's an option here for is the screen being based on a single form or on a relationship between that form and another. We haven't set up any relationships yet. That will be in a future tutorial. So we're just going to leave this as the form by itself. But briefly, each screen can be based on each screen is based on a particular set of information, either the set of information in this form or a set of information made up of this form plus others. That's where the relationships come in. So just to keep things simple and get us going to start with, we'll just leave this as the form by itself, no relationships in effect. So a few other things you get on the settings page. It shows you the URL for the screen, although actually until we've saved it, this is showing us new, and really it's the ID number for the screen that we want to see. So let's save this, and there we go. This is screen number 9. So the URL for this screen is SID equals 9, and in fact we can just copy that, and if we open a new tab, then we can go there. So there's screen number 9, and there's the default. Now you'll notice there there isn't a whole lot of difference. There is actually a different title, and there's a different button over here, Advanced Search, which is normally off. Advanced Search is a deprecated feature, but when you're creating a new screen, that will be one of the possible options. Normally when you're creating a new screen, you're going to be tailoring the options, so we expect you'd probably remove that. So you can get to it through the URL. Also, it says here some PHP code. If you wanted to include this screen in some other PHP system somewhere, you would actually only need these lines of PHP code, and as long as it's on the same server as formulize is installed on, then the other PHP application could include the formulize information in it. And include this screen right inside the other application. So you don't even necessarily have to be logged in directly to formulize to interact with the screens you've created. This makes it an interesting tool for creating an interface and an application that you then embed inside another system. That's quite possible, and there will be future videos that describe the process of doing that. There's also a securities token. It's an older feature from Zoop's underlying system that formulize interacts with, and by default that's on just as a security measure. Sometimes you definitely want to turn this off if you're just based on the interface that you're using. And there's also a preference in formulize globally to turn that off overall. So that's this is just something to be aware of. Normally you would leave that on unless you're finding that you're unable to save information in your forms during normal operation. Then it might be a good idea to turn it off. So here's our recent sightings form. What are the different things that we can do in now that we have control over the screen? Well, one thing we can do right off the bat is, what's the default view that we want to be made available when the screen loads. We want sightings in the last 14 days. Let's assume this is a screen intended for supervisors. So that save view that we made in a previous video, let's use that as the default. This screen is intended for them to have a quick way to just go to a page and it'll give them that information right away. And in fact, if that is what we want the screen to show, maybe we don't want any other options. Maybe we don't want a current view list, so it says leave blank to turn off the list. So that will have the effect of removing the current view list entirely. It will use this view that we made as the default, but the current view list will be removed. If you do have the current view list in use, you can control which views are available. So maybe you wanted to give the users a choice of a few different views. You could pick them here, but since we've turned off the list, that won't be relevant. You may have noticed the working message when the page loads. You can turn that on or off. Should the entries be inside a scrolling box, yes or no? You may have noticed when there are multiple columns that are in effect. Let's just add a few more. If we add multiple columns, then we need to add a few more. What type of animal? Creation date. There, that's pushed us over the threshold. Okay, so the entries are in a box that scrolls by itself by default, but you can turn that on and off as well. So let's leave the working message on, but let's turn the scrolling box off. And you can also control how many entries appear on each page of the list. By default it's 10. We don't have more than that right now, so that's fine. But obviously you could have lots of entries each page, or as it says, you could even have 0. If you type in a 0 here, it means that all your entries are going to appear on one page. There's a preference in formulize that lets you, if you have an awful lot of entries and you want to give the users basically a warning before they load many thousands of entries on the screen, there's a preference that lets you control what that threshold is, where formulize will give them a warning before it loads them or not. And there's a separate video about the preferences in formulize. So that's those are some of the basic things we can do. Let's just save those changes. And then let's just reload this page and see how things are different. Okay, so right off the bat, no current view list. And also, because there's no current view list, you'll notice that the Save View buttons, the buttons related to the views, have disappeared. Because when there is no current view list, then there's really no way that you can interact with saving or deleting views. Also, no scrolling. The entire browser window scrolls now. So, depending on your situation, how you're laying this out, what information's in your form, you may or may not want that to be the default behavior. So already we're seeing some changes, but it's not necessarily the streamlined view of things that we would want just yet. Actually, I think there's an interaction effect going on here because I changed the columns, but then I reloaded this screen, so it would have pulled up the new default view is the sightings, but there were already some, we'd already fiddled with the columns and the searches and so on. So I think this is actually different than if you want a sort of a fresh, real reload, you ought to just pretend you're going to the screen for the first time. So if we go back to the URL, press enter, it'll load. Yeah, that's a bit different. That's better, because the so there was. I'm sorry that was a bit puzzling, but it's in some ways a good example of the interaction effect between different parts of the formulize system. So what happened there is we had been looking at that screen. We changed the columns. We did a few different things. Meanwhile, we were also changing the settings for the screen over here. So once we had saved those settings, and then we went back and we just reloaded, triggered the last page load over again, then formulize detected the new settings that we had saved, namely no current view list, etc. But it was also detecting the things that were part of the last page load, such as use these columns and no searches and stuff like that. So it turned off the current view list, it removed these buttons, but it kept the columns and the other things that we had requested specifically as part of that page load. So anyway, so if we reload from scratch, so to speak, like I just did, then we actually get the saved view, the last 14 days sightings view, and if you've watched the save view video, you'll recognize the search term that we used and the calculations that are part of that view. The columns that we picked for that view are in effect, and current view is not displayed, and there's no scrolling box of any kind around the entries. So some of the other things that you can change, headings and interface. Should the headings appear at the top of each column? So if you want to, you could actually turn off the headings, depending on your information. That might or might not be useful. I think we will keep them for now. If you're using headings, how often should they repeat? By default, they repeat every 5 rows. That's just so that in a larger list, as you're scrolling, you probably have the headings on screen. At least somewhere the headings are going to be on the screen, so you know what you're looking at. But depending on your data, you might not want to do that. Let's maybe turn that off for now. Should the advanced search or calculation status messages appear at the top of the list? Use neither, both, just advanced search or just calculations. It's really only the calculation messages that this applies to right now. That's these options here. I think we want to leave them in place for now. However, if you had a save view that was, say, just the calculations, and you didn't want users to switch to the entries, you could turn these off. You could say use neither, and then basically users would not have any way of switching back and forth between calculations and entries. In our case, we want to let them switch, so that's fine. Quick search boxes appear at the top of the column. Well, we can turn those off. It might streamline things a little bit. And if this is a predefined screen, we've already said back on the Entries tab, this is what we want to show people. We're not expecting people to be sort of mining through this data or doing their own queries. We're presenting some preconceived data to them. So maybe turning the search boxes off is more appropriate in this case. You can control how wide the columns are going to be, how many characters of text should be in each cell. If you have multi-line text boxes where people are typing in lots of things, maybe you want to change that to 0 for no limit, or to a very large number so that you can see more of the text. Should checkboxes appear to the left of each entry so they can be selected? So show the checkboxes based on the user's permission to delete. That's the default. Or you could just say show on all of them. Sometimes you would want the checkboxes there for selecting for other purposes. Or you can say no, don't show the checkboxes. We'll just leave that as default for now. If people have permission to delete entries, they can. Should the magnifying glass links appear to the left of each entry so people can click through? You can actually turn those off. You could say no, and then what would happen is there'd be no magnifying glasses here, and people would not be able to drill down onto the details. Maybe you just want to give them a summary list and you don't want them to get any details beyond what you've shown in the list. So you can turn those off too. So those are some of the other things that you can do. Let's click Save and see the effect. There we go. So again, loading from scratch. Here we are. So no search boxes, but the other options as they were. Now you'll notice that the search box is not there, but in fact the 14-day search is actually still in effect. The screen system is smart enough to know that if you've modified things and you're calling up a view that has a search in it, but the search boxes are not present, then we'll just keep the search going in the background. So basically that search is part of the underlying view. So it is in effect, and if we change this, for example, we could change the date on this particular citing, maybe back to February 1. So we'll save that, and when we go back to the list now, you see it's gone. So the search is still in effect. It knows that we have a today minus 14 search going on, but it's just not giving us the text box to interact with it because we told it that the quick search boxes should not be there. The other basic thing that you often do when you're streamlining entries like this, streamlining screen like this, is you change the way people interact with change the buttons and just sort of the actions that people are able to do with the screen. So one of the basics is adding entries. So we could say add a citing is maybe more appropriate than adding an entry. Maybe we just want people to do it one at a time. We can turn that off completely, just leave it blank and it's off. Proxy entries actually don't apply in this case. If the form was only allowing one entry per user, then you would have potentially two buttons, adding an entry or updating an entry. If you had already created one, then you could update it, and then there'd be a second button for making a proxy entry on behalf of someone else. But that's doesn't apply really in this situation. We can turn it off just so that it's not in our way. Now maybe you still want to allow people to export, but maybe not entries, just to match the language that we're using here, export sightings. One of the simplest things you can do to make a big difference in how people respond to your information is use language that responds to to the situation they're in. They're not dealing with entries; they're dealing with sightings of animals in this example. So let's call them that. Maybe turn off other things that we don't expect users to deal with at the moment. Now perhaps we do want to let them change columns if they wanted to see a different collection of information on these entries for the last 14 days. Well, we do have a calculation in effect as part of this view, so let's maybe leave that there. Procedures is an advanced feature that we haven't talked about yet and is not relevant to this view. Well, export, we do have a calculation in effect, so let's leave the export calculation button there. Advanced search, as I mentioned before, the feature is deprecated. Really the search boxes at the top of each column are what you want to focus on, not the advanced search, so we'll turn that off. Cloning entries, well, we don't really expect this to be used as a screen for managing the entries, so let's maybe turn that off. Well, and from that point of view, maybe they shouldn't be deleting either, so let's just get rid of all of these. There's also the select all and clear buttons. By default, what those do, they're right here. You can see how it selects all, clears, and then you can clone the entries you've selected or delete them. But yeah, I mean, if we're just packaging up information here for the user, let's turn all that off. And from that point of view, we should also be where did it go? Yes, do not show the checkboxes. We don't care about people being able to select entries because we've turned off the buttons that that let them do anything with the entries. So that is under the headings and interface tab. Turn that off to no checkboxes. We've left a few buttons there. There's the reset view, save view, and delete view. Now, when the current view is turned off, so like a lot of the features in the screens are related to each other, and they are to some extent aware of when their partners, so to speak, are not present. So these three buttons are already not there, so we could just leave them alone. Although if we turn the current view box back on, those buttons will reappear because we still have them in the list here. If we actually erased these and then turned the current view back on, well, then the buttons would be gone, because right here we would have had blank. We would have blanked these boxes, and so those buttons would be sort of off permanently. And so maybe it's just better to leave them on, leave them like this. They will sort of magically appear again if we ever turn the current view back on. So there we are. We'll just save that, and now things will look quite different because we've turned off even more things and sort of focused the user around just the actions that we expect they're going to do on this particular form, on this particular screen rather. So there we are. Yeah, now we're quite streamlined. So we've got add a sighting, change the columns, calculations, and export the sightings. And obviously a simple way to make this even even more basic would be to turn the calculations off. Now the sum total, it's giving us the sum total. That's the calculation that's in effect as part of the underlying saved view. You can watch the saved view video for more information. But yeah, if that calculation is there, so we've left the calculation button on in case people, same thing. If they click modify calculations, they will see the choices. We've got sum total of the number of animals. Same thing if you just click this, it's actually going to give you the same thing. Sum total of the number of animals. It's the same pop-up window, just two ways of getting to the same thing. So there we have a very stripped down version of the form, or of the list of entries in this form. And all the existing features that are still there, they work though. If we sort by total animals, we've got smallest to highest, or highest to lowest. we've got you can look at a specific entry. Here's the the details for that entry. Beaver sighting midday. So all done. And yeah, there you have it. And it's very different, of course, from this sort of default that we started with. I mean, you look at that and it feels fairly overwhelming compared to this is obviously very straightforward. Users don't have to decide on very much to figure out what they want to do. It's pretty clear what your options are at this point. As I said, even clearer if we were to remove the calculations. So I hope that's straightforward enough, makes sense, and gives you an idea of some of the basic power that you have through the screens. Now, one of the interesting things in formulize version 4 is we have this concept of default screens. So as I pointed out, we have two in effect now. There's the default entries in the wildlife activity form. That was created just as part of the form. It's when you create a form, you get these default screens made for you. But we've created this new screen, new version of it. And when we're just looking at form number 1, it's just like this right now. But what we can do, we could say for form number 1, this form, the wildlife activity form, maybe we want the recent sightings to be the default now. So let's save that. And then what happens is when somebody goes to form number 1, they're going to have something different. Same URL, different screen in effect now. And in fact, that's true throughout the system. If we log in as one of the supervisors, who has access to that particular saved view, then we say wildlife activity form, and there we go. They're interacting with the different screen that we created. As we've set this up right now, this will actually cause a bit of a problem for other users because the save view that we chose is only published to supervisors. So in reality, well, you have to be careful about what links you're making available to which groups of people at what point in time, and so on. That leads to other questions about, well, do you want to start customizing the navigation options in your website? There are other modules you can install to let you do that. By default, formulize just gives you a link to the form, and you can customize the default to be what you need. But if you want to start getting as specific as we actually are here, where you have a save view or a particular screen that's designed just for a specific group, then you do have to think about well, beefing up some of the navigation options. And you can certainly, the simple way to do that, at least if you know basic HTML and are comfortable altering the files, there's some things you can do in the template, the theme, the main theme template for formulize, and you can look at the styling video to see where some of those where the files are that you'd be making changes to. But there are also modules that you could install for Impress CMS or Zoops, depending what your underlying platform is. With the standalone version of formulize, it's Impress CMS, and you could start to add custom menus over here and things like that. So those are the basic things that to keep in mind as you're using forms and screens, and we'll be covering more advanced features in a later video.